Aloha everyone, we will go ahead and get our webinar started. Welcome to the COVID-19 Public Health Action Webinar, Green Growth Recovery Opportunities. My name is Steph Moyer and I am the Community Initiatives and Training Coordinator for the Hawaii Public Health Institute. Before we get started, there are a few Zoom housekeepings I would like to go over. For all questions, please utilize the chat box or questions and answers box located at the bottom of your screen. We are not offering continuing education credits for our COVID webinar series. And lastly, all webinars are recorded and available on the Hawaii Public Health Training HUI's YouTube channel. It's my honor to introduce you to our guest speakers today. First, we have Celeste Connors. Celeste is the Executive Director of Hawaii Green Growth Local 2030 Hub. Celeste has 20 years of experience working at the intersection of economic, environment, energy, and international development policy. Before joining Hawaii Green Growth, she was CEO and co-founder of CDOT's Development LLC. Celeste previously served as the Director for Environment and Climate Change at the National Security Council and National Economic Council in the White House, where she helped shape the administration's climate and energy policies. Celeste is a Senior Adjunct Fellow at the East-West Center and was a faculty member at the Johns Hopkins University of Advanced International Studies in the Energy, Resources, and Environment program. She holds a Master's in Development Studies from the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies and a Bachelor's in International Relations from Tufts University. Celeste grew up in Kailua, Oahu. Our second speaker today will be Brianna Rose. Brianna is the Director of Operations and Partnerships for Hawaii Green Growth and has worked with the network since it launched in 2011. She is Chair of the Board of Directors for Kanu Hawaii and was selected for the Obama Foundation's inaugural Asia Pacific Leaders Program as one of 200 emerging leaders representing over 30 countries, states, and territories across the region. She was also recognized as part of the Pacific Business News' 2020 class of 40 under 40 honorees. Brianna is a graduate of University of San Francisco and was born and raised on Maui. Now, before I turn it over to Celeste, we would like to start this presentation with a short video.
Naka moana nui akea, e ho'opili mai ia kako. We say that moana nui akea, or the Pacific Ocean, is what connects us. The Pacific Ocean unites island people and has sustained our way of life for thousands of years. But today, millions of island people living across the Pacific are on the front lines of climate change, its effects destroying homes, infrastructure, and livelihoods. Islanders have become the world's first climate refugees, and we will not be the last. Recognizing Hawaii's unique position to address these risks, our coalition was founded, and together we have established public policy, an open data platform to monitor progress between government, business, and community, as well as projects that empower at-risk populations by bridging indigenous and modern innovation. Because of our achievements, Hawaii is recognized by the United Nations as one of the world's first sustainability hubs to meet the global goals. Hawaii's model is already being scaled through Hawaii Green Growth and the Global Island Partnership. With support, we can scale this model further to build resilience for underserved communities across the Pacific region. Led by islands, for islands, we can unite with the Pacific to face one of the most critical social justice challenges of the 21st century. And by telling our story, chart a sustainable course for the people of island Earth.
Aloha, everyone. Stephanie, I think that's my cue. I say I'm off mute at least, so I'll start. I always get chicken skin with that video because I think it really highlights the situation we are in as an island economy, as a community that's facing some very serious issues with the current health crisis, with our related economic crisis, but that there's a certain degree of solidarity also with other island communities that are facing similar challenges, similar disruption. And I just want to just say that we're really, Brianna and I are delighted to be here today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share and to connect, to learn from each other. And I'm also doubly excited because we're pleased that HIPHI is now formally a new member of the Hawaii Green Growth Network that we'll talk about today. So why don't we just go to the next slide and just kick this off. So what is Hawaii Green Growth? We're a network-based organization. And what that means is that we're a group of over 150 members now, individuals and institutions. This is slide needs to be updated. It's simply a snapshot of partners that cut across every sector, and our community partners, civil society, as well as government at every layer, and business and academia. So a network-based organization that what we do is that we're working towards helping Hawaii achieve our local sustainability goals that have a global impact. Why don't we go to the next slide here? We, as a network-based organization, a little bit of our history and our narrative arc, that we came together as a group in 2011, inspired by the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting. That's this photo here. Interestingly, I was actually working in the Obama administration at the time at the White House, as Stephanie said, on green growth policy and strategy. And I didn't know actually that there was a group of inspired leaders here locally that came together, former Lieutenant Governor, current Senator Brian Schatz among them, to say, how does Hawaii get on a green growth trajectory? And I just want to clarify also that when we talk about green growth, despite what the name might imply about being an environmental initiative, we are not. We work with our environmental partners very closely, but green growth, especially that which was launched in 2008 and 9, came at the heels of the last financial crisis. And what countries agreed to at that time, among them these leaders here, is that we need to get on a green growth recovery. So that's an Organization of Economic Cooperation Development definition, OECD definition, which is essentially green growth is fostering economic growth and development while ensuring that natural assets continue to provide the resources and environmental services on which our well-being relies. And that's, there's no better community, I think, that understands that than Hawaii and that relationship that we have to nature. But APEC further adopted the green growth agenda, which is why we have the picture of APEC here. So green growth is inherently an economic recovery strategy. Sustainability is about economic, social, and environmental well-being. They call it the three-legged stool. So we actually, as an organization, look at all of those issues, economic, social, environmental, through a cultural lens, and that's the opportunity here. So this is a slide of APEC, launched in 2011. I would say the other part of our genealogy and our narrative arc, not just green growth, but comes from Malama Hawaii, an incredible group and movement that actually has its origin stories with late Senator Kenneth Brown and the Malama ethic, an incredible speech that he delivered to the Hawaii State Senate in 1973. And the Malama ethic being that we need to look at these key host culture values, Malama, Kuleana, Aloha, and Ohana, to drive the way that we want to see our economy grow and thrive. So let's go to the next slide. When I mentioned that Hawaii Green Growth, actually, let me cut across to the, let's go to 2 slides from now. Yeah, and then I'm going to go back to that slide. Oh, let's go back one. So we had a bit of a slide reversal here. I mentioned Hawaii's statewide sustainability goals. Hawaii in 2014, inspired by other island leaders, actually, inspired by the Micronesia Challenge, which inspired something called the Caribbean Challenge, which in turn inspired the Aloha Plus Challenge, which was a challenge of other island leaders to Hawaii to be a model for sustainability for other island communities and communities more broadly. We have 6 statewide sustainability goals that cut across smart, sustainable communities, natural resource management, doubling local food, waste reduction, clean energy, and green workforce and education. And a lot of the issues that this organization that HIPHI works on are in these goals. These were developed in 2014. The year following, in 2015, the international community came around a set of global United Nations-led Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And those that are not familiar with these, there are 17 goals. Another colorful circle. Again, I would note that Hawaii, we had our statewide framework before they did. Our colors were chosen before they did, so we should have maybe put some IP on that. But when we launched this, was truly a kako effort. We had all 4 of our mayors, our governor, our state legislature, our civil society partners, OHA, businesses come together around these 6 time-bound goals. So both the Aloha Plus Challenge and the UN Sustainable Development Goals are to be achieved by the year 2030. This is really important. These are goals that cut across health and education, well-being, workforce development, climate change, that are really to address some of those critical issues that we have to help avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change in the next decade. So the Secretary General of the United Nations has declared this the decade of action. And so we were well within that. If I go back, Maka, to the slide prior to this one, is that this has, unprecedented political coherence around this initiative. This is a photo that was taken around this time last year, or actually April, celebrating the 5-year anniversary of the Aloha Plus Challenge goals. Now, what happened is, because the international community has come around these goals, they've also recognized that in order to achieve these goals, there's going to have to be effort at the local level. In other words, the rubber hits the road at the local level. And so part of this, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations launched an initiative called Local 2030. And the backbone of this initiative are these hubs. So Hawaii Green Growth was invited to become a hub. We're the only sustainability hub in North America, the first island economy. And at the, following the 5-year anniversary, we celebrated that. If you look at this photo, again, it reinforces the political coherence around the Aloha Plus Challenge, with the governor, speaker, Senate president, with all bodies of government there, legislature, the judiciary, our congressional leadership, as well as island leaders, and heads of state from Palau and other places, and UN officials that actually came to Hawaii to celebrate the 5-year anniversary of this. Now, Maka, if you go forward 2 slides now, I want to give you a little bit more of a colorful picture about what these UN Sustainable Development Goals are. And again, I helped work on these when I was in the administration in the White House. I think these are really an incredible initiative to emerge from what was previously the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, which actually focused more squarely on health, education, child and maternal health. And then when folks said, when those were set to expire in 2015, the international community came together and said, we need to re-up on these goals, but we need to enhance them. We need to have a broader set of goals that include also the environment and the economy. And so now you have these SDGs. And when we think about health and well-being, very often SDG 3 comes to mind. But the thing about these goals is that you can't make progress on one without making progress on the other. So good health and well-being, SDG 3, is contingent on SDG 2, zero hunger, or SDG 1, no poverty, or even gender equality, education. Now, if you go to goal 17 there, that's about partnerships. And I think that's what Hawaii Green Growth Local 2030 Hub represents. So if you go to the next slide, Maka, I think we'll get a better view, as I recall, of what really our approach here. So when I mentioned that Hawaii was recognized as a Local 2030 Hub, we were not recognized because of an aspiration to sign on to the SDGs. This beautiful initiative, though, launched in 2015. It's because Hawaii has been practicing sustainability for over 1,000 years. And Hawaii Green Growth is explicitly founded on host culture values through a cultural lens, because the SDGs to our mind is simply the ahupua'a turned horizontal, and or if you turn the SDGs vertical, you get the ahupua'a, a system of management that the international community is now looking at as a model. It also represents a lot of the discussions happening around a circular economy, which to my mind is an island economy. It's how we look at resource management in a way that not just manages our existing resources, but looks for prosperity and enhancing the health of our community and Aina, everything in between, a real ridge to reef approach and anything and everybody in between. So if you go to the next slide here, like I think this is a further reflection of the Aloha Plus Challenge goal. So what we at Hawaii Green Growth do as a network-based organization is when we made that commitment to these 6 statewide sustainability goals, we then set about a multi-year process to engage our communities around what we should be measuring to track progress against these goals, because they say you measure what matters. So we actually had to go into the community and to find out what matters to our community statewide. So we did a whole series of convenings over 3 years in every county with diverse stakeholders over 2 days each to figure out how should we track this? What is the best available data? How do we want that data reflected? Where should we put this? How should we structure it? And this is the Aloha Plus dashboard. This currently sits on the state.gov website. So 7 days a week, 24 hours of the day, 365 days out of the year, you can go on here, click into the dashboard and actually see how are we doing against local food production, our marine managed areas, waste. And if you click into these various boxes, you'll get actually all the primary data. You'll actually also have a whole section, different types of data reflected in different ways, and a section on learn more, make a difference. Now, sometimes you'll see there's a puka, and that generally means that there is no agreed goal or target around that, or there might be some challenge around baseline data or what the case might be. But in the past, when we've had a puka, there's been, as you can imagine, greater interest in filling that gap. So how do we bring the community together to figure that out? So this is the dashboard. It provides transparency and accountability. And they say that transparency leads to accountability. Accountability drives innovation, and innovation is key to resiliency, which is really key as we're thinking about the current COVID crisis. One other thing I'll say about the dashboard, because I want to come back to this later, it's as good as we as a group make it. It's as good as the data that we have. And so all of those 17 UN SDGs are actually embodied in the 6 statewide goals in the different indicators and metrics that we're tracking. And so there's always an invitation with our network, let's make this better. If you see a gap, particularly, I'll actually say we do need better health data. And I would look to this community, this partnership, to actually help iterate on that and see what we can do to improve that. And I would also note that the dashboard will be migrating to a different platform by the end of next month, an Esri-based platform, which will allow for more story mapping, narrative, and GIS mapping, different ways to actually reflect the data. So let me go to the next. Oh, I do want to make a comment that I'll come back to as well. And Bree, I don't know in the slide where we have the image of the Local 2030 Hub. I think we'll get there in a bit. Thanks, Maka. So if you go back to the next slide and we talk about the COVID resource here, I should note that there is no specific, I should say, health goal in the way that there might be for the SDGs. And that just was intentional from our organization, our network, that actually said health is something that we want indicators and metrics to be throughout the different goals to show that it's truly systems, across systems, that it's not in a single silo. So here we actually have the COVID data, a COVID section. So I should just note, I want to just put a quote here from the Director General of the World Health Organization, that the pandemic is a reminder of the intimate and delicate relationship between people and planet, and any efforts to make our world safer are doomed to fail unless they address the critical interface between people and pathogens and the existential threat of climate change that is making our Earth less habitable. So going back to normal is not an option, particularly when, as island economies, we're faced with these unique challenges prior to COVID. So as I said, the Aloha Plus dashboard now features the COVID data, resilience and response efforts, and other resources in collaboration with the Hawaii Data Collaborative, the Hawaii Geographic Information Coordination Council, Esri, and other county players. So this is our spotlight. And what we track is how well Hawaii is able to slow the spread, including the visualization on cases by the Hawaii Data Collaborative and the City and County of Honolulu, noting that even as cases across the state rise and the curve in Hawaii remains one of the lowest in the country. It also tracks how communities in Hawaii have responded and public health preparedness information. We have a story map on the 2008 financial crisis and its impacts on the Aloha Plus Challenge. And it also includes data on the results of the Hawaii Green Growth Network survey that we'll share on a bit later. So I would ask Maka if we go to the next slide. This is super exciting to me because now you have a statewide dashboard, which we talked about. The Aloha Plus Challenge is a statewide dashboard, which rolls up to these broader global UN Sustainable Development Goals. Our counties have taken the lead in further localizing these goals. And you have here as an example of the Hawaii Aloha Plus Challenge. And now we have the Maui Aloha Plus Challenge, because very often we get asked the question, what can I do? And very often we feel, against the backdrop of these huge threats and crises, COVID and climate change, can one individual make a difference? And the answer is yes. How do we help find ways that we can channel our interests and our efforts? Well, this is exciting. This is a localized dashboard, so you can take action and measure impacts across these different areas of energy, efficiency, reducing your water use, choosing to buy local. And all of that data is captured, and it will help to deliver against this statewide goal. So especially when we're talking to youth and students, and we worked with some groups on their farm to school program, or even their community gardens. One school group in particular we worked with, and they were actually composting their lunch every day after school. And then they would take that compost and sell it for a good sum of money. And then they were able to reinvest that money back into their program, but they kept all their data on a whiteboard. And so we were able to work with them on an app where they could actually put their data into the dashboard and actually feel how what they're doing is making a difference, not just across the state, but globally. So if you go to the next slide, Maka, this is the global slide. So I've gone very deeply local to our county, and here's global. This is what I mentioned before about Hawaii Green Growth, the network Local 2030 hub being recognized by the United Nations. Here are the other hubs. Sometimes we get asked the question, why is Hawaii Green Growth working locally when we have so many challenges, globally, excuse me, when we have so many challenges here locally? Well, you can't be a global model if you're not succeeding locally, first and foremost. And actually, if Hawaii has models that we are looking at and that we can share with other communities, we are compelled to do so. And we're compelled to do so because we are already experiencing these impacts of climate change. And if we have a model that's grounded in 1,000 years of systems thinking and knowledge and values-based, then we're compelled to share that and to learn from each other, because the actions of our partners around the world will ultimately have an effect on how safe and secure and how resilient our community is against the backdrop of climate change. So we launched this with the United Nations. We've launched a virtual platform. We're also working with a group called the Global Island Partnership on a new initiative called the Local 2030 Island Network. And this is an island-to-island, peer-to-peer exchange where islands are learning from each other. And we've talked about issues like food security. In the Cook Islands, we had the Minister of Economy tell us that during the COVID crisis, they went around and handed out seeds to everybody in their community. We talked to folks in Puerto Rico and what they're doing with the World Cafe there, connecting our own partners, Ma'o Farms and others to what's happening. So we have this a global platform for islands to connect with each other. Tomorrow, in fact, we're going to have a dialogue with island youth leaders on building back better from COVID. And so we'll put that information into a slide so you can look at that. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is just a fun picture of launching the hub and launching the Local 2030 Island Network that I mentioned. It includes Seychelles, it includes Guam, but it also includes Ireland that has associated itself as an island partner here. This was the discussion that we had at the United Nations, really exactly this time last year when we were able to meet in person. It was the high-level political forum. And we, as island economies here, we're sharing our own solutions to how we can achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So now if you go to the next slide, I think we'll get to the survey results. So Actually, I think it was in partnership with HIPHI, and very initially with this idea of how do we make sure that as and when resources are flowing, because again, we're having a conversation about recovery, but against the backdrop of very real and immediate and present hardships that our communities are facing, that they don't have enough food, that they're struggling with what's happening with school, unknown, unemployment, furloughs. It's a very difficult situation. And yet we know that we need to be addressing the current situation while also looking forward and anticipating that when money actually does come available, how do we make sure the partners like those here on this Zoom meeting get the resources that they need to support existing programs that are proven that can actually provide employment and also support a green growth recovery. And this could be a farm to school program, for example. And I know Lydie and I have had conversations about this. So this prompted us to do a network-wide survey of shovel-ready or off-the-shelf ready jobs. So connecting with our partners here. And we're still, the other partners, including HIPHI, were HTA, Hawaii Tourism Authority, Chamber of Commerce, Hano, and KUA, and HACBED, so Hawaii Alliance for Community-Based Economic Development, Hawaii Alliance for Nonprofit Organizations. We also had the Institute of Sustainability and Resilience, ISR, at University of Hawaii Manoa, Anthology Group, Sultan Ventures, and other state and county network partners. So the survey has solicited over 300 partner responses from across 6 sectors statewide. We've identified over, I think now, 3,900 jobs at over $5 million price tag. We've presented this at the House COVID Committee, to our Senate partners, and also to the State Economic Recovery Navigator, Alan Oshima. So I will provide a high-level overview of the results. And actually, in fact, I think I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Brianna, right now. So if you go to the next slide, Maka, and then Bri, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Celeste. Wonderful. Yeah, no, as Celeste shared, the Hawaii Green Growth Network Recovery Survey was really intended to receive and solicit input from our partners across the state, and also help serve as a resource to help support Hawaii's sustainable recovery efforts. So I'll share a little bit about just kind of a high-level overview of some of the survey results. So this was actually conducted in May, and with the collaboration of partners that Celeste shared. So this was done through many network organization partners across Hawaii, and solicited over 300 responses, as Celeste shared, across 6 sectors. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on what we heard from partners about some of these projects. So if you take a look here at some of the sector and geographic representation, folks we heard from this survey, top sectors represented were the nonprofit sector at 35% and businesses at 28%, followed by academia and government. And really the intention of this is to hear all different voices from different sectors, public and private and civil society. The geographic representation of folks we heard from in this survey were really 31% that worked statewide in terms of their impact, 23% from the city and county of Honolulu, 18% from Hawaii County, followed by Maui and Kauai County, as well as folks that worked in the Pacific more broadly. Let me take a jump to the next slide, Maka, please. And really, the survey identified as one of several different pieces. As Celeste shared, the Green Growth Recovery Project, education and training opportunities that could support skilled workforce, and different thematic policy recommendations and other input about what organizations were facing during the COVID crisis and different needs and opportunities. So one of the areas that we really dug into was the Green Growth Recovery projects, and looking at compiling this really directly from what we heard from partners, from stakeholders. So I'll go into a little bit of a couple of examples in a minute, but the projects cut across really all of the different Aloha Plus Challenge goal areas, including, you can see a snapshot here, green workforce and education, smart sustainable communities, local food and agriculture, natural resource management, clean energy, and waste reduction. If we can go to the next slide, I think we heard a couple things from partners that, probably not surprising, but interesting nonetheless. So these are really looking at existing programs and projects that, if supported, could create, new and expanded jobs to really advance all these different areas towards the 2030 goals. So we heard from partners that some of the biggest barriers of these existing projects, not surprising, 75% said funding. Additionally, community awareness, political and other support to move the projects forward, essential supplies, and then as well skilled workforce, which really gets to the part around the role of education and workforce and vocational training. If you hop to the next slide, Mako, please. This is a snapshot of the dashboard. So Celeste showed earlier the Aloha Plus Challenge dashboard and the resilience and COVID recovery section. If you actually look at that part of the dashboard, all of the data from this survey is actually available there, and you can take a look at the Green Growth Project list, which is updated on an ongoing basis. We can actually continue to get new information in. Take a look at the number of jobs created, resources needed for these different programs, additional benefits that they support in addition to jobs, and really this is updated as new ready to go projects become available. So I'll just share a couple of examples really from each of the goals. I think it was a really great diversity of projects that we saw that could benefit a number of different areas in Hawaii's economy and really boost around. My cat has joined us for the webinar, so you might hear him in the background. So I'll go through a couple examples. So 31% of the ready to go projects contributed to the green workforce and education goal. A couple of these different areas, I think, just really interesting to kind of show again that diversity of different sectors that can support sustainable economic growth. Broadband was an area, a part of the state initiative investing in statewide infrastructure for increased digital access and inclusion. I think an area that we've all seen has been really revealed through this time with COVID in terms of access and inclusion. Creative media sector, including Made in Hawaii Film Festival and UH Manoa's Academy of Creative Media. This is a program that provides training for Hawaii's creative industry sector, such as animation and film, and actually are areas of training that students can do remotely, interestingly, during this time. And then another great example is Kupu's Leadership Development Program, which creates thousands of jobs that support different sectors, particularly conservation, but really across a number of these different Aloha Plus Challenge areas. Wanted to share another big area that came up was smart sustainable communities, which cuts across a number of different goals and targets. Diversity of jobs that we heard were improvement projects, really varying for the different counties. And one in particular was the Waikiki Beach Public Access Improvement Plan. We also heard from a number of different network and community-based partners such as Kua'aina Ulu Aumo, Ealupu, and Hawaii Alliance for Community Economic Development, who work with communities across Hawaii. And so we heard of a number of different community-based stewardship projects that when combined actually create hundreds of jobs across various communities statewide, such as restoration of fish ponds, lo'i, and other cultural resources that create a number of different jobs as well as community and cultural benefits. Another key area, not surprisingly, I think Celeste touched on this earlier, is local agricultural sector was a major theme that we saw in this survey in addition to discussion around sustainable tourism. 21% of the projects that were put forward by partners contributed to local agricultural sector. And you know, the intersection between that sector and a number of the other different goals. The Hawaii Food Systems Education and Workforce Program really focused on P20 farm to school education with farmer training. And this looked at, you know, how this could create nearly 30 new jobs for about 3 million. I know Hawaii Public Health Institute has been really a champion of this with the farm to school partners and collaborators. So this was really one that, that was put forward that could have multiple benefits. And the Kohala Institute is another example of looking at diversified agricultural park, 30-acre ag park on Hawaii Island that can again employ smaller scale of 20 individuals, but in a sector that really advances a number of these different things we saw were important to our partners and the local food goal for 2030. In addition, you have UH West Oahu's work on EKI, the food resilience system, with research and academic employment on food security. And then I would say a couple other sectors I wanted to touch on for the different Aloha Plus goals. 17% of the projects that were put forward in this survey contributed to natural resource management. And this sector has actually done a lot to organize around conservation jobs, looking at between 2,000 to 4,000 conservation jobs across many different public, private, and nonprofit organizations, so such as statewide wildfire risk reduction program, interagency biosecurity, which works across all the counties, Conservation Corps, and others. So there's been a lot of different organization around conservation jobs that could support the Aloha Plus natural resource management goal. And then lastly, I'll just share in the last two goals, we had 7% of partners focused on the clean energy and waste reduction. I know there are many more, but some of these looked at areas for renewable energy, energy efficiency and transportation. So looking at examples of community solar projects, lighting replacement for historic buildings such as Hawaii Theater, bike share programs on the different counties, and then, needed to repair for updating solid waste transfer stations. So I think just wanted to provide more of a snapshot of some of the projects that we heard that with support, could really advance green growth recovery and advance the goals of the Aloha Plus Challenge, create new jobs, support the economy, and really benefit a number of different sustainability and resilience objectives and community well-being overall. So I think we heard some really, really rich feedback from partners, and as Celeste shared, we've been sharing this as a network with a number of different audiences to really bring attention to these different opportunities for green growth recovery. And so currently, Maka, I'll have you go to the next slide if you would, just to flag as well. And again, this was really asking the question from our stakeholders. What are some of the jobs and what are some of the green, the education, training, and workforce development programs? So there's an ongoing list about different vocational opportunities to support workforce training in these different sectors. And then again, this is just a snapshot of what we saw in the survey. And it's part of it's not a one-time effort, but it's part of an ongoing effort with the Hawaii Green Growth Network to listen and hear about different opportunities and how we can share, uplift, and actually these are being tracked on an ongoing basis on the Aloha Plus dashboard. So the data is available and the survey is open. So we welcome additional projects and continued dialogue on how we can support continued work in these areas as we look at green growth recovery options. So with that, I'll kick it back to Celeste, who will share a bit more about the 2020 benchmark report based on the dashboard that can support green growth recovery as well.
Get off mute here. And I just have to acknowledge Brianna. It is an extraordinary talent that she has to give a presentation with her wonderful cat there with her. Usually my kids are bombing my meetings, but they're happily at the beach with grandma today. So unless they emerge, but thanks, Bri. So what is this report? So basically, as I mentioned, last year we celebrated the 5-year anniversary of Aloha Plus. So we're living in the 6-year anniversary of this great effort. And so we're doing this report for 2020 that is actually providing the benchmark data. And actually we had planned to do this, but with COVID, it becomes even more important that we really have a benchmark against which we can see our recovery and improvement going forward. Take a look at some of the bright spots where we're doing well, but also some of the areas that we really need to dig in order to achieve our 2030 goals. This will also serve as what the data that we will have for something that we're going to do in 2022. It's a midterm review of the Aloha Plus goals. It's halfway point from when the Aloha Plus Challenge was launched. Now, just one thing to note, because we are a local 2030 hub, we are part of a network of United Nations partners recognized for what Hawaii's done over many, many years. We are having an opportunity to present something called a voluntary local review. VLR. It's a terrible acronym, but to put it into context, when a country has the opportunity to report on what they've done on their sustainable development goals, they will submit a voluntary national review. Now, there are some places where there isn't the type of leadership at the national level that people would like to see, and we've seen mayors really take the lead in submitting a voluntary local review. We saw New York City do that, and LA. So Hawaii will be submitting our first voluntary local review. What's exciting is that it's actually the first statewide voluntary local review in the country. It's going to be what all of our partners are doing, including our counties. We did a soft launch last week, which is very exciting, and we have the video that's available on our website. We did this with all of our county partners, U.S. Representative Congressman Ed Case, as well as with our other island partners, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, Fiji. And so we were showing that island economy solidarity. So I think that we will have time to show this video. I'll just check with Stephanie. And then we're really delighted to actually take any questions that folks have about anything that we've shared today. Get the green light from Stephanie, and then I think we can go. Thank you.
We can go ahead with the video.
I do with pride each time I see Hawaii as a whole society step forward and express our care for our island home and our desire to see the lands, the waters, and the people of Hawaii thrive. As we come to the year 2020, we start a very important decade for us from 2020 to 2030.
And the sail plan for the hub here in Hawaii has really been mapped out already by the Aloha Plus Challenge. It's there. The sail plan that heads us to better leadership decisions, better policies, and a way to allow community to be a part of something extraordinary, especially in their own homeland.
You know, in Hawaii, we have a really unique framework. It's the Aloha Plus Challenge, and it really is our local framework for implementing the Sustainable Development Goals in a meaningful way that's authentic to us.
As part of the 5-year anniversary of the Aloha Plus Challenge, we're reviewing collective progress at the start of 2020, the decade of action in 2030. While nations submit their voluntary national review to the UN, cities such as New York, LA, and Helsinki have submitted a voluntary local review. Hawaii will become the first statewide voluntary local review through the Aloha Plus Challenge, with public, private, and civil society partners with the Hawaii Green Growth Local 2030 Hub. In July 2020, Hawaii can share local progress on the global goals with the international community.
Yeah, so one of the benefits, I think, of already having the Aloha Plus challenge and dashboard is all of the stakeholder work that went into developing it. So there's already an existing network of people that can be drawn upon to help guide the process to do the voluntary local review. So this is an opportunity for the voluntary local review to really help join county, state, and global adaptation and mitigation initiatives. So for example, at the county level, I think with some of the OLA initiatives that came out with the City Resilience Plan, we have different partners that have been identified as being relevant to carrying out some of these adaptation actions and initiatives.
Today, we have the opportunity to take stock of our progress. Where are we on track? Where are there gaps?
I think we're excited at the Hawaii Tourism Authority to participate in the VLR because, again, it gives us an honest report card. It gives us an honest feedback of what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, things we've addressed and things we haven't addressed.
And make it not just a part of making Hawaii more resilient, but being an example for the Pacific Islands, for the nation and for the world.
I think what we have as a strength is as an island community, we've always had stories to tell. And we continue to tell stories, whether it be in the visitor industry, right? We have a beautiful destination with a deep, rich heritage of a host culture, but also a multicultural, ethnic society that's come together and said, hey, we're all one race, we're all one human race on an island Earth, and we only have one shot at this.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Now I'm, again, just 2 other things I just want to highlight here. Sometimes we get asked the question, how can I get involved? A couple different ways I would just say before we go to Q&A, here's a great example from folks in your network who might be part of a youth community, as we might call it. We've got a great youth advisory council that has actually launched. They're doing these different challenges this week with Pono Homes and others to basically get youth involved in some of the work that they're doing to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. If I go to the next slide, Maka, this is really where folks, we are asking you, actually this is a direct request from us and we can talk about this more. Again, the dashboard is a COCO effort. We really look forward, especially with HIPHI, to improve some of the data and the metrics that we have as well. If the next slide, again, the survey is still open for people to put their jobs, existing jobs in there that are ready to be funded. And again, what we want to make sure is that there's no question as to what jobs, where would the money go? We want to make sure it's clear. These are places that the money could go and actually put people back to work and support green growth recovery. And the final slide, I think, is further supporting, oh, here's another one on the dashboard, excuse me, and on the survey. And the final slide, Maka, if we go through that, is great, I think, Pau. So let me hand it back over, Stephanie, to you.
Great. Thank you so much for your presentation. And just as a reminder to all attendees, please don't hesitate to put any questions you have into the chat box or into the question and answers box. So our first question that we have is, do you think the current pandemic has had positive benefits regarding climate change? For example, Hanauma Bay reports clear waters and more ocean life flourishing. Overall, is it measurable?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, I think the connection with climate change, as I say, let me just make sure I have that question I'm going into. Has it been a good thing for climate change? I think the intersection of COVID and climate change, honestly, is that COVID is a postcard from the future of a potentially climate disrupted world. Because COVID is, to my mind, is inherently about disruption. It's disrupted our supply chains, including our tourism economy, which is actually the driver of our economy currently. But at the same time, it's driven us to innovate. We have been compelled to blow past incrementalism, right? So some of the things that we're actually seeing transpire across our communities are things that we might have wanted to do anyway or thought would be possible. For example, remote working, more flexible work schedules, which is reducing congestion, which to the point of climate change is actually reducing carbon dioxide. It's actually also allowing for, you know, essential workers to get to where they need to more effectively and more quickly. I mentioned, you know, sometimes after like a full day of Zoom meetings, all of us don't really feel like we've actually captured any additional time back into our schedule, but, you know, we are able to, those of us that have the luxury of spending more time with our family can do that. So there are certain things like this, we've had to blow past incrementalism on some of the things that we might have wanted to do anyway. And it actually brings a question about, as we look at our recovery, and while we hope, you know, what does the new normal look like? We've heard people talk about that a lot. There might be things from our collective experience that we want to continue to do in some way. Buying local food is certainly one of those. You know, the whole supply chain disruption, we've all been looking at ways of supporting our local agriculture, our restaurants that are purchasing local. And so I certainly hope that that's something that we can continue. Can we measure that? I think we're actually looking right now at that very question. What are ways that we can both, from a science perspective, measure really what the impacts are of COVID, whether it's a reduction in traffic in really important places like Hanauma Bay. How has that improved the ecosystem? What does that actually tell us about the way that we can better manage our important natural resources here while also not compromising economic security and development? And so I think this is the other issue I'd like to highlight. With these goals, it does a couple of things. But first, it shows that you need progress across all of the different goals in order to have this holistic moving forward. But at the same time, it does actually allow us a vehicle, a mechanism, a framework to evaluate potential trade-offs in the decisions we make. So for example, sometimes, not to simplify this, you have to tear down a forest to build a hospital, because community health, the health of our community, is important. We have a limited land resources here in Hawaii. We have a 100% clean energy target. We have a housing crisis. So we have these different challenges that we're balancing. And I think the thing about sustainability, and the thing about having a sustainability framework, is it allows us to look at how we do it, and more important, have the conversation about it, and recognizing how we can actually create shared value through that process. So I would say on climate change, let's think about how this has compelled us to act in ways that will actually mitigate against a climate disrupted future. And let's just look at ways that we can actually capture this benchmark data to see how we're going to do moving forward.
Thank you. Next question we have is, who is the point entity responsible for the organizing and planning the implementation of initiatives that aims to address food and water security?
I would say that's all of us. I'll actually turn to Bree, who is our, as I mentioned, our Director for Operations and Partnerships. Generally with Hawaii Green Growth, because we're a network-based organization, we don't have a functional lead on all of our goals, but certainly we have a dashboard coordinator. I should have mentioned actually, and this is a really important point, before I answer that specific question, when we look at the dashboard, when we see things that we want to do together and drive action on, just so you know that Hawaii Green Growth as a network-based organization, we convene around 50 meetings a year. And it's organized through 4 different working groups. And as our new partner, I encourage all of you to think about what working group might resonate most with you. We have a policy and legislative working group that's co-chaired by Pono Shim and Regina Ostergaard-Clem from HPU. That's where we look at innovative policy and legislation to drive action on our goals. We have a local global next gen working group, also known as the Lo'ikalo to the United Nations Climate Change Negotiations Working Group. And that group is to look at connecting our work locally and globally, and particularly focused on youth engagement. That's co-chaired by Ke'eo Duarte with Kamehameha Schools and Amanda Ellis with ASU Global Futures. We have our measures and our data working group. That's the group to make sure that our dashboard is as good as it can be with the data, relevant data, and to find gaps in that and to engage our community around that. That's co-chaired by Todd Nakapoi and Vasilis Sirmos with the University of Hawaii. And then we have a business forum, a sustainability business forum of 24 CEOs that convene to support the action on the goals, focused around a dialogue and concrete action. So Bree, if you want to weigh in on how specifically we're looking at food security and water issues, I would say it's the network partners that are part of our HEG network that are actually leading on those initiatives. But Bree, you can provide a little bit more color.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that's a great question. And so with each of these different diverse areas, including fresh water and food security and energy and others, we as a network work to coordinate across the data, the policies, the actions, but we work closely with the state, county, and private sector and business leads. So for freshwater, for example, we work closely with the Freshwater Council, an initiative that brings together a number of different stakeholders working on freshwater security. They're a key collaborator actually in developing the target that's tracked on the Aloha Plus dashboard. That's the Hawaii Community Foundation's Freshwater Council and many partners, and then actually updating the data on a regular basis. And I know they work very closely on a number of different policies and initiatives and projects. So they're a point, and among with many others, including DLNR, that we work really closely with on the freshwater front, the DLNR's Freshwater Commission. And then for local food, work closely with the Department of Agriculture, as well as number of network-based efforts, including the Farm to School Network and Local Food Coalition convened by Ulupono Initiative. So I think with Hawaii Green Growth, we on the dashboard on the Aloha Plus Challenge, we work with these different experts and leads in each of these different sectors, and really work to collaborate with both state, county, and public and private and civil society experts in each of these areas to make sure that we're capturing all those perspectives, as well on the policy and data and other pieces. So I'll just hopefully that provides a little bit extra context on the many people that are behind the dashboard, the things you're seeing today.
Thank you. Okay, next question we have is, has the downturn in tourism due to COVID-19 given insight into environmental management?
I think absolutely. There's a really interesting conversation happening around regenerative tourism. So from our perspective, it's not necessarily, there's calls to diversify our economy, and I think there's calls to diversify even within the tourism economy. And certainly with regards to natural resource management, what is interesting is that we didn't think that the pathway we were on prior to COVID was necessarily sustainable. And that was actually recognized by the Hawaii Tourism Authority. And they recently released, directly prior to COVID, their 5-year strategy, which actually includes the Aloha Plus Challenge as a framework for that. And I think in that strategy, which I think is quite well laid out, it talks about improving the connection between the community and the visitor as a partnership to better support resource management. And so the idea is that, people come to Hawaii because they want to actually see, experience, and support our precious natural resources. We want to actually provide opportunities to support that as well. One of the things that we've done with our business forum in partnership with the Nature Conservancy is launched the first carbon offset pilot. That's an 8,000 acre Kona reforestation project in Kona Hema. And so I actually think that this is, COVID has actually really caused us to rethink or accelerate our thinking in ways that maybe that we knew that we needed to go to, I'm actually confident and happy to see that HTA was already pivoting in that direction. I'm also now observing other partners outside of Hawaii wanting to see our success in doing that. One of the things that we like to see and do it with Hawaii Green Growth is look for external partners that can help provide resources and support to the work that we're doing here, in the vein of importing resources, exporting our knowledge. So yeah, I think there's a very active discussion around regenerative tourism, better natural resource management, and that's also taking the form of conservation jobs. It's also core to a green growth recovery strategy.
Thank you. Next question we have is, can you please speak about how you are bridging community voice and the recovery resilience planning by policymakers? Will community input truly be taken seriously and serve as the guide for decision makers?
Well, personally, I think it has to. I'm speaking as a former policy person. When I was in government, when I was in the White House, I saw the value of public-private partnerships. We were always reaching out to our community partners in the various sectors in health, education, environment, to really enhance what we're doing, and business as well, because as a former government employee, I knew that we had a lot of work ahead of us and we didn't always have the resources to do that. So I think community engagement is key. Community voice is critical. It's actually essential in order for us to achieve our sustainability goals and to build resilience. You know, resilience is inherent in the strength of our communities, and the stronger our community is and voices in that. So we're doing that in different ways. We're doing that through our working groups and always welcoming our community voices to be part of that. The data that we're tracking, the measures themselves, were a result of a community-driven process and continue to be that way. We also do that through our partnerships. There's some really exciting work underway, both with HIPHI and other groups. We've seen the Aloha Economic Futures Group emerge and uplift. And in this case, what are ways that we can connect what we're hearing, at least the voices of our community, to policymakers? We've also done this, as Brianna mentioned earlier, to share the survey results to the House COVID Committee, to Senate partners, to our state legislators at the federal level, and also with our businesses who can see those jobs, can see the opinions and the priorities, and to work in their ways to implement it. So this is really what at least Hawaii Green Growth is about. Partnerships are essential, community voices are key, and we'll use our platform to help uplift those voices anytime we can, including tomorrow. Our youth are a really important stakeholder group in all of this, and tomorrow we're going to put this in the chat, but we invite all of you as HGG network partners to attend the local 2030 Island Network, where we're going to hear from incredible youth leaders in Hawaii, working in food security, and other youth voices from around the world and other islands and indigenous voices. And we actually will have, we'll hear also from the climate negotiator for the small island developing states, who will respond to this. So this is another way that we can get community voices heard.
Great, thank you. I do want to honor everyone's time, and I apologize if we have not gotten to your question, but I will ask one more question, and this is, how is the Aloha Plus Challenge and the UN initiatives impacted or hindered by the current administration?
And I'm assuming this is the federal administration.
Yes.
Okay. I think, you know, there's a silver lining for everything. And I would say that the local 2030 hub embodies this. You see, the community and our local leaders are going to go, regardless of what happens or doesn't happen at the federal level. And actually, the whole local 2030 movement, which connects to the United Nations, the recognition that the action and the solutions need to be at the local level, has caused this movement, a genie that won't be put back in the bottle, of local leaders, of mayors and governors, Hawaii as a state stepping forward and saying, we're doing our voluntary local review, we're reporting what we're doing to our community, we're showing accountability to our community, but also sharing that with the rest of the world. And so you're seeing, you know, I would say multilateralism almost reframed through local efforts. And so as a hub, we're connecting with our partners, our other partners in Liverpool and in Brazil and in LA and Samoa. And it's these local efforts that are really driving action at the end of the day. So I would say that there are certainly some barriers that we're facing with regards to COVID currently managing the crisis and recovery. But we've just seen a groundswell of local and community leadership that is going to carry us forward.
Thank you so much. So again, I want to say a big mahalo to Celeste and Brianna for joining us as our guests today. I want to thank all of the attendees on Zoom, as well as our HIPHI staff working behind the scenes to help this webinar run smoothly. I do want to remind you that we are continuing our webinars every other week, and our next webinar will be on Wednesday, August 5th from 1 to 2 p.m. We are still finalizing our topic and we'll make that announcement as soon as possible. Again, mahalo for joining us today, and we hope to see you on August 5th. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.